The desert wind whipped across the compound as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez crouched behind a concrete barrier, her M4 rifle pressed against her shoulder. Around her, the sounds of gunfire echoed through the night air, but this wasn't just another training exercise. This was the moment that would define not just her career, but challenge everything the military establishment thought they knew about women in combat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's journey to that fateful night began years earlier, in a small town in Texas where she grew up as the daughter of a mechanic and a nurse. From childhood, she possessed an unusual combination of technical precision and nurturing instinct that would later prove invaluable on the battlefield. Her father, Roberto Rodriguez, had served 2 tours in Vietnam, and the stories he shared around the dinner table weren't about glory or heroism. They were about teamwork, sacrifice, and the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. When Maria announced her intention to join the Army at 18, the reaction from her community was mixed. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, pulled her aside after class one day in spring 2010. "Maria, you're smart enough for college, for a career that won't put you in harm's way," she said, her voice filled with genuine concern. "Why risk everything for a job that might not even want you?" The question stung, but it also revealed the underlying assumption that would follow Maria throughout her military career, that being a woman somehow made her less suitable for the demands of military service. This assumption wasn't limited to her small town. It was deeply embedded in military culture itself. When Maria arrived at Fort Benning for basic training, she was one of only 12 women in a company of 200 recruits. The drill sergeants, while officially committed to equal treatment, couldn't hide their skepticism. Drill Sergeant Thompson, a 20-year veteran with 3 combat deployments, made his position clear during the first week of training. "Listen up, recruits," he barked as the company stood at attention in the Georgia heat. "Some of you think this is summer camp. Some of you think you're here to prove a point. Let me tell you something. The enemy doesn't care about your feelings, your politics, or your gender. They care about one thing: killing you and your buddies. If you can't handle that reality, there's the door." His eyes lingered on Maria and the other women as he spoke. The message was clear. They were expected to fail. The physical demands of basic training were brutal for everyone. But Maria noticed that her mistakes were scrutinized more closely than those of her male counterparts. When Private Johnson failed to complete a rope climb, it was attributed to a lack of upper body strength, a correctable weakness. When Maria struggled with the same exercise, whispers spread through the barracks that maybe women just weren't cut out for this. But Maria had learned something important from her father's stories about Vietnam. He'd told her about a medic named Sarah who had saved his life during a mortar attack in 1969. She was smaller than most of the guys, he'd said, but she had something else. She could think clearly when everyone else was panicking. That's what kept us alive. Maria began to understand that her path to proving herself wouldn't be through matching the physical strength of her male counterparts. It would be through developing the mental toughness and tactical intelligence that made the difference in real combat situations. During weapons training, while other recruits focused on rapid fire and dramatic displays of marksmanship, Maria studied the mechanics of each weapon system. She learned to field strip and reassemble her M4 rifle blindfolded. She memorized the ballistic characteristics of different ammunition types. She practiced breathing techniques that kept her steady under pressure. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, no relation, despite the shared surname, noticed Maria's methodical approach. Unlike Thompson, Rodriguez had served with women in support roles during his deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He'd seen firsthand how gender assumptions could blind leaders to the unique strengths different soldiers brought to their units. "Rodriguez," he called out after a particularly challenging day on the rifle range, "you're thinking too much out there. Trust your training and let your instincts take over." "Roger, Drill Sergeant," Maria replied, but privately she disagreed. In her experience, thinking more, not less, was what separated good soldiers from great ones. The turning point came during a field exercise in week 8 of basic training. The company was divided into squads and tasked with navigating a complex night infiltration mission. Each squad had to move through enemy territory, avoid detection, and secure a high-value target. Maria's squad, led by acting squad leader Davis, a farm boy from Iowa who'd impressed the drill sergeants with his natural leadership abilities, found themselves pinned down by simulated enemy fire just 200 meters from their objective. The exercise controllers, playing the role of opposing forces, had positioned themselves perfectly to exploit a gap in the squad's approach route. For 20 minutes, the squad remained trapped behind a low ridge, unable to advance or retreat without taking casualties. Davis, frustrated and running out of time, was preparing to order a frontal assault when Maria spoke up. "Davis, there's a drainage ditch running parallel to our position about 50 meters to the east. If we can get there without being detected, we can use it to flank their position." Davis looked skeptical. "How do you know there's a ditch there?" "I studied the terrain during our planning phase. The topographical map shows a seasonal runoff pattern that would create natural cover along that route." The rest of the squad exchanged glances. Maria had been quiet throughout most of the exercise, methodically following orders and keeping her opinions to herself. This was the first time she'd spoken up with a tactical suggestion. Davis weighed his options. Time was running out, and the direct approach was likely to fail. Against his better judgment, he decided to trust Maria's assessment. "All right, Rodriguez, you take point. Show us this ditch." But what happened next would change everything for Maria, and show her squad that sometimes the most unlikely soldier could save them all. Maria's navigation proved flawless. The drainage ditch was exactly where she'd predicted, and it provided perfect concealment for the squad's flanking maneuver. They reached the objective without detection and successfully completed the mission with time to spare. As the squad celebrated their success, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez approached Maria. "How'd you spot that route when nobody else did?" "I spent extra time studying the maps, Drill Sergeant. I figured if I couldn't match everyone else's physical abilities, I needed to be smarter about tactics and terrain." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That's soldier thinking, Rodriguez. Keep that up." Word of Maria's tactical insight spread through the drill sergeant cadre. While some remained skeptical about women in combat roles, others began to recognize that Maria represented something different, a soldier who compensated for perceived weaknesses through superior preparation and tactical intelligence. Maria graduated from basic training in the top 10% of her class, but the real test was yet to come. Advanced individual training at Fort Gordon would determine her military occupational specialty, and Maria had requested assignment to the Signal Corps, a field that would put her in communication centers and command posts, close to the action but not directly in the line of fire. However, the Army had other plans. Due to her high scores on technical aptitude tests and her demonstrated leadership potential, Maria was selected for cross-training in combat engineering. The assignment would make her responsible for detecting and clearing improvised explosive devices, IEDs, the signature weapon of insurgent forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her instructor at the engineer school, Sergeant First Class Williams, was blunt about the challenges ahead. "Rodriguez, I'm going to be straight with you. This job has one of the highest casualty rates in the Army. You're going to be walking point on patrols, identifying threats that could kill your entire squad. Are you sure you want this?" Maria thought about her father's stories, about the medic who'd saved his life by keeping her head when everyone else was panicking. "Roger, Sergeant. I'm sure." The training was intensive and dangerous. Maria learned to identify the subtle signs of buried explosives, disturbed soil, unusual objects, patterns in debris that might conceal deadly devices. She practiced with remote-controlled robots that could investigate suspicious areas without risking human lives. She studied the psychology of insurgent bomb makers, learning to think like an enemy who wanted to kill her and her fellow soldiers. But beyond the technical skills, Maria discovered something else. She had an intuitive understanding of how to read terrain and predict where threats might be hidden. The same analytical mind that had helped her spot the drainage ditch during basic training now helped her identify potential IED locations before they became deadly surprises. After completing her training, Maria was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division and deployed to Forward Operating Base Liberty in Iraq. The year was 2012, and while major combat operations had officially ended, American forces still faced daily threats from insurgent attacks and improvised explosive devices. Maria's first patrol as a combat engineer came just 3 days after her arrival. Staff Sergeant Mike Chun, a veteran of 2 previous deployments, led the patrol through a neighborhood in eastern Baghdad where intelligence reports suggested insurgents were placing IEDs along the main supply routes used by American convoys. "Stay alert, Rodriguez," Chun told her as they moved through the narrow streets. "These guys are good at what they do. They know we're looking for their bombs, so they're getting creative about how they hide them." Maria nodded, her eyes scanning the road ahead. She'd studied after-action reports from previous patrols, learning the most common IED placement patterns. But as they moved deeper into the neighborhood, she noticed something that didn't fit the established patterns. "Sergeant Chen," she called out softly, "there's something wrong with that pile of rubble ahead." Chun stopped the patrol and moved up to Maria's position. "What do you see?" "The debris pattern doesn't match the surrounding area. Look at the concrete. Chunks, they're too uniform, too carefully placed. And there's no dust accumulation on the surface pieces, which suggests they were placed recently." Chun studied the area through his binoculars. To his eyes, it looked like any other pile of construction debris in a neighborhood that had seen years of conflict. But Maria's observation made sense. The rubble did look suspiciously organized. "Call in the EOD team," Chun ordered. "We're going to treat this as a potential IED." The explosive ordnance disposal team arrived 30 minutes later and confirmed Maria's suspicions. Hidden beneath the carefully arranged rubble was a sophisticated improvised explosive device designed to target American patrols. The bomb was large enough to destroy an entire Humvee and kill everyone inside. As the EAD team safely detonated the device, Chun approached Maria. "Good catch, Rodriguez. That could have been ugly." But Maria's success also highlighted the ongoing tension around women in combat roles. While her squad members recognized her value, other soldiers at the base were less accepting. The dining facility became a daily reminder of the divide. Conversations would stop when Maria entered, and she often found herself eating alone while male soldiers clustered around nearby tables. Private First Class Jackson, an infantry soldier from another unit, made his feelings clear during one such encounter. "It's not that I don't think women can do the job," he said loudly enough for Maria to hear. "It's just that when things get really bad, I want someone next to me who I know can carry me out if I get hit." The comment stung because it touched on Maria's deepest fear, not that she would fail, but that her failure might cost someone else their life. She'd trained harder than anyone else, studied longer, prepared more thoroughly, but the question remained: when the moment of truth came, would she be able to do what was necessary to protect her fellow soldiers? As the weeks passed and Maria continued to prove herself on patrol after patrol, that question would become increasingly urgent. Because intelligence reports were suggesting that the insurgents were planning something big, something that would test every soldier's courage and skill. And Maria was about to discover that all her training, all her preparation, was leading to a moment when everything would be on the line. 3 months into her deployment, Maria had established herself as one of the most reliable combat engineers in her unit. Her success rate in identifying potential IED locations was among the highest in the division, and she'd earned the grudging respect of most of her fellow soldiers. But respect and acceptance were not the same thing. The team dynamics within her squad were complex and sometimes tense. Staff Sergeant Chun had become her strongest advocate, recognizing that Maria's analytical approach complemented the squad's more intuitive soldiers. Specialist Torres, a mechanic from Los Angeles, appreciated Maria's technical expertise and often sought her advice on equipment modifications. But others remained skeptical. Corporal Bradley, a former college football player from Alabama, never openly challenged Maria's competence, but his body language spoke volumes. During briefings, he would position himself with his back partially turned to her. During patrols, he would double-check areas she'd already cleared, sending a clear message that he didn't trust her judgment. "It's not personal, Rodriguez," Bradley explained during one particularly awkward moment. "I just can't shake the feeling that I need to be extra careful when you're on point. My cousin got blown up by an IED in Afghanistan because someone missed something they should have caught." Maria understood his fear, but she also recognized the impossible position it created. If she made a mistake, it would be attributed to her gender. If she succeeded, it would be dismissed as luck or the result of male soldiers compensating for her weaknesses. The turning point in squad dynamics came during a routine patrol in November 2012. Intelligence reports indicated that insurgents were planning to target a school where American soldiers were helping to rebuild damaged classrooms. The mission seemed straightforward: sweep the area for IEDs, secure the perimeter, and provide protection for the construction crew. Maria was walking point, using her metal detector to sweep the road ahead when she noticed something that made her stop cold. The pattern of trash along the roadside was wrong, too organized, too deliberate. But more importantly, she noticed that local civilians were avoiding a particular stretch of road, taking a longer route around what appeared to be an empty lot. "Chun," she called back to the squad leader, "we need to check that lot on the right. Something's not right." Chun moved up to her position and surveyed the area. "What do you see?" "It's what I don't see. Look at the foot traffic patterns in the dust. People are walking around this area, not through it. That suggests they know something we don't." This time, Chun didn't hesitate. He called for the EOD team and established a security perimeter around the suspicious area. What they found exceeded everyone's expectations: a complex network of interconnected IEDs designed to create a devastating kill zone. The bombs were linked together in a way that would have maximized casualties, destroying not just the initial target, but also anyone who came to provide aid. "Jesus," whispered Torres as the EAD team carefully mapped the network of explosives. "How did you spot this, Rodriguez?" Maria had been asking herself the same question. The truth was, she couldn't point to any single indicator that had triggered her suspicion. It was a combination of factors: the trash patterns, the civilian behavior, the way the shadows fell across the lot, even the smell of the area, which seemed too clean for a space that should have accumulated months of debris. "I don't know," she admitted. "It just felt wrong." That evening, as the squad debriefed the day's mission, something had shifted. Bradley, who had been the most resistant to accepting Maria as a full member of the team, spoke up during the discussion. "Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I've been acting like you had something to prove, but the truth is, you've been proving it every day. That complex today, none of us would have spotted it. You saved our lives and probably saved the lives of those school kids too." The acknowledgement meant more to Maria than any official commendation. She'd spent months trying to prove that women could perform in combat roles, but she was beginning to understand that the real challenge wasn't proving her capability. It was changing the culture that assumed capability based on gender rather than performance. However, Just as Maria was beginning to feel truly integrated into her squad, the security situation in their area of operations was deteriorating. Intelligence reports indicated that insurgent groups were planning a major offensive designed to coincide with the drawdown of American forces. The attacks were becoming more sophisticated, more coordinated, and more deadly. During a briefing in late December 2012, Captain Morrison, the company commander, outlined the emerging threat. "We're seeing increased activity from multiple insurgent groups. They're using more advanced weapons, better coordination, and they seem to have detailed intelligence about our patrol routes and timing." Maria studied the pattern of recent attacks on the briefing map. Something was bothering her about the locations and timing, but she couldn't quite identify what it was. The attack seemed random, but her analytical mind detected an underlying pattern that wasn't immediately obvious. "Captain," she said, raising her hand during the question period, "have we considered that these attacks might be part of a larger plan to draw us into a specific area?" Morrison looked at her curiously. "What do you mean, Rodriguez?" "The pattern of attack suggests they're trying to push our patrols toward the eastern sector. Each incident has been positioned to make us adjust our routes in that direction. If I were planning an ambush, I'd want to control where my enemy was going to be." The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Davis, pulled up a larger map on his laptop. "Show me what you're seeing, Rodriguez." Maria moved to the front of the room and traced the attack locations with her finger. "Look at the progression over the past month. Each attack has been positioned to make the eastern route seem safer by comparison. But if you look at the terrain in that sector, it's perfect for a complex ambush, multiple escape routes for the attackers, limited cover for us, and civilian areas that would restrict our ability to call in air support." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Maria was right, the enemy wasn't just attacking random targets. They were shepherding American forces toward a prepared kill zone. "I want a full intelligence assessment of the eastern sector," Morrison ordered. "And I want our patrol routes randomized effective immediately." "Good work, Rodriguez." But as Maria returned to her seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The pattern she'd identified suggested that the insurgents were in the final stages of their plan, and whatever was coming was going to be bigger and more dangerous than anything they'd faced before. What Maria didn't know was that in just 3 weeks, her analytical skills would be put to the ultimate test, and her squad's survival would depend entirely on whether she could turn her tactical insights into life-saving action. That moment of ultimate testing came sooner than anyone expected. The first week of January 2013 brought an unusual quiet to Forward Operating Base, liberty that felt like the eye of a hurricane. The daily mortar attacks that had become routine stopped. The IED discoveries along patrol routes dropped to almost zero. The radio chatter intercepted by intelligence units fell silent. To most soldiers, the calm was a welcome relief from months of constant tension, but Maria found it deeply unsettling. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "This doesn't feel right," Maria told Chun as they prepared for what intelligence had designated as a routine patrol. "When the enemy goes quiet, it usually means they're planning something big." Chun nodded, checking his weapon for the third time. "I know. Morrison thinks they might be regrouping after the losses they took last month, but my gut tells me something else is going on." Maria had been studying the intelligence reports obsessively, looking for patterns that might explain the sudden quiet. What she found was disturbing. The silence wasn't random, it was geographically specific. Areas that had previously shown high levels of insurgent activity were now completely quiet, but the silence formed a distinct pattern around the eastern sector she'd identified as a potential ambush zone. "Chun, I need to show you something," she said, spreading a map on the hood of their Humvee. "Look at the areas where activity has stopped." She marked the locations with a red pen. Now look at the sightlines from the eastern sector. Chun studied the map carefully. Every area that had gone quiet was visible from elevated positions in the eastern sector. You think they're clearing fields of fire? I think they're preparing for something that requires unobstructed observation and communication lines. And I think they want us to notice the quiet, because it's designed to make us feel safe enough to take the routes they want us to take. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a new soldier, Staff Sergeant Amanda Walsh, a medic who had been transferred from another unit after her previous team was hit by a roadside bomb. Walsh carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who had seen combat and survived. But Maria noticed something else. Walsh was one of only 3 women assigned to combat roles in the entire base. Rodriguez, right? Walsh said, extending her hand. I've heard good things about your work. It's nice to have another woman around who knows which end of a rifle to point at the enemy. Maria appreciated the solidarity, but she also recognized the burden that came with it. Every woman in a combat role was representing all women in combat roles. Their successes were individual achievements, but their failures would be attributed to their gender. How are you finding the adjustment? Maria asked as they walked toward the briefing room. Walsh paused, choosing her words carefully. The work is the same. The attitudes are familiar. You learn to prove yourself over and over again until eventually some of them forget you're different. But you never get to just be a soldier. You're always a female soldier. That afternoon's patrol briefing confirmed Maria's worst fears. Due to the decreased threat level in other areas, Command had decided to increase patrols in the eastern sector. The logic was sound from a tactical perspective. If the enemy was avoiding the area, it was probably safe to increase their presence there. Our mission is to establish a stronger presence in the eastern sector, explained Lieutenant Davis. Intelligence indicates the insurgents have abandoned their positions there, so we're going to take advantage of the opportunity to disrupt their supply lines. Maria raised her hand. Sir, have we considered that the apparent abandonment might be deliberate? The pattern of decreased activity suggests. Rodriguez, Davis interrupted. I appreciate your analytical approach, but we can't let paranoia prevent us from taking advantage of tactical opportunities. The intel is clear. The eastern sector is currently the safest area in our operational zone. Maria bit back her response. She'd learned that pushing too hard against command decisions was a quick way to be labeled as difficult or insubordinate. But as she looked around the briefing room, she could see that she wasn't the only one who felt uneasy about the mission. Torres caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Bradley was frowning at the map, his finger tracing potential escape routes. Even Chun, who usually maintained strict discipline during briefings, looked troubled. After the briefing, Chun pulled Maria aside. What's your gut telling you about tomorrow's mission? My gut is telling me that we're walking into exactly what they want us to walk into. The question is whether we're smart enough to recognize the trap and turn it to our advantage. Chun nodded. Slowly, what do you recommend? Maria had been thinking about this possibility for weeks. We need to assume this is an ambush and plan accordingly. Extra ammunition, medical supplies, and communication equipment. We should also request air support. On standby, even if command thinks it's unnecessary. And if you're wrong, if the eastern sector really is clear, then we'll have been over-prepared for a routine patrol. But if I'm right, double quotes, Maria left the sentence unfinished. They both knew what the alternative meant. That evening, Maria found herself unable to sleep. She walked to the perimeter of the base where she could look out over the darkened landscape toward the eastern sector. The silence was almost complete. No vehicle traffic, no construction sounds, no signs of normal civilian activity. For a region that had been bustling with life just weeks ago, the emptiness was unnatural. Walsh joined her at the perimeter fence. Can't sleep either? Something's coming, Maria said quietly. I can feel it. You know, I've been in 3 different units now, Walsh said. And I've noticed something. The women who succeed in combat roles, we all have something in common. We see things differently. We notice details that others miss. Maybe it's because we've had to be more observant just to survive in a male-dominated environment. Maria considered. This. You think that's why I'm seeing patterns that others are missing? I think you're seeing patterns because you're good at your job. But I also think you're willing to trust your instincts in a way that some soldiers aren't. Tomorrow, if your gut tells you something is wrong, don't ignore it. Don't worry about being wrong. Worry about being right and not acting on it. As Maria returned to her quarters, she made a decision. Tomorrow's patrol would be different. She would be more alert, more prepared, and more ready to act on her instincts than she had ever been before. She couldn't know that this decision would save not just her own life, but the lives of her entire squad. But first, she had to get through the longest night of her military career, the final hours before everything she had trained for would be put to the ultimate test. Dawn broke gray and overcast on January 15th, 2013, exactly as Maria had feared it would. She woke before her alarm, her mind immediately focused on the day ahead. She had spent the night reviewing maps, checking equipment, and preparing for contingencies that she hoped wouldn't be necessary. Her combat load was heavier than usual: extra ammunition, additional medical supplies, and a backup radio that she'd requested from the communications section. The pre-mission briefing was routine, but Maria noticed subtle signs of unease among her squad members. Bradley was checking his equipment more thoroughly than usual. Torres had quietly loaded extra magazines into his vest. Even Chun, who usually maintained an air of calm confidence, seemed more focused than normal. "Remember," Chun told the squad, as they prepared to board their vehicles, "the intel says this area is clear, but we're going to treat it like hostile territory anyway. Eyes open, weapons ready, and trust your instincts." Maria took her position in the lead vehicle, her metal detector and analysis equipment ready. As they left the base, she noticed that the usual sounds of the city were absent. The streets that should have been filled with morning traffic were eerily quiet. Shop owners who usually opened their businesses early had kept their doors closed. Even the stray dogs that normally roamed the neighborhood were nowhere to be seen. "Shun," she called over the radio. "The civilian pattern is wrong. This area should be busy at this time of day." "Roger. Stay alert. What's your assessment?" Maria scanned the buildings ahead. "It looks like the local population has been warned to stay away. Windows are shuttered, doors are closed, and I don't see any foot traffic. This feels like the calm before a storm." The convoy moved slowly through the empty streets, with Maria walking point about 50 meters ahead of the lead vehicle. Her job was to identify potential IED locations and hidden threats, but she found herself focusing on the broader tactical picture. If she were planning an ambush, where would she position her forces? The answer came to her as they approached the main intersection that led into the eastern sector. The buildings on either side of the street were perfectly positioned for a crossfire. The intersection itself was a natural choke point where vehicles would be forced to slow down. And most importantly, there were multiple escape routes that would allow attackers to fade away after engaging American forces. "Chun, I'm seeing optimal ambush terrain ahead. Request permission to do a detailed sweep of the intersection." "Negative, Rodriguez. We're behind schedule, and intel says the area is clear." "Keep moving." Maria felt a chill of premonition. The intersection was too perfect, too obviously dangerous to ignore. But she had received a direct order, and questioning it further would be insubordination. She continued forward, but every instinct was screaming that they were walking into a trap. As they reached the intersection, Maria noticed something that made her heart race. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Multiple vehicles had been here recently. Despite the apparent abandonment of the area, the tracks led to positions that would provide perfect cover for an attacking force. "Chun," she called urgently. "Fresh vehicle tracks leading to concealed positions. This is not an abandoned area." Before Chun could respond, Maria heard the distinctive sound of a rocket-propelled grenade being fired. Time slowed as she traced the smoke trail back to a building on the eastern side of the intersection. The RPG was aimed directly at the lead vehicle. "RPG!" Maria screamed into her radio. "Take cover!" The explosion destroyed the lead vehicle and sent debris flying in all directions. Maria was thrown to the ground by the blast, her ears ringing and her vision blurred. Through the smoke and chaos, she could hear the sound of automatic weapons fire erupting from multiple positions around the fateful intersection. The ambush was even more sophisticated than she had feared. The attackers had positioned themselves in a coordinated crossfire that would prevent the American forces from retreating or advancing. The destroyed vehicle blocked the street behind them, while concentrated fire from ahead made forward movement impossible. Maria's squad was trapped in the kill zone she had predicted. As her vision cleared, Maria could see that the situation was desperate. The lead vehicle was burning, and she could hear screams from the soldiers inside. The second vehicle had managed to pull behind partial cover, but it was taking concentrated fire from multiple directions. Her own squad was pinned down in the open intersection with minimal cover and no clear route to safety. "Chun!" she called out, but there was no response. Looking toward the command vehicle, she could see that it had also been hit by RPG fire. The radio antennas were twisted and broken, cutting off communication with the base. Walsh, the medic, was already moving toward the burning lead vehicle, despite the ongoing gunfire. "I need covering fire," she shouted. "There are wounded soldiers in there." Maria realized that her squad was not just trapped, they were on their own. No radio communication meant no air support. No reinforcements were coming. The only people who could save them were themselves. As she assessed the tactical situation, Maria's training took over. She identified the primary enemy positions, calculated fields of fire, and began to formulate a plan. But she also realized something else. The leadership structure of the squad had been disrupted. Chun was wounded and possibly unconscious. The other senior NCOs were either dead or incapacitated. For the first time in her military career, Maria found herself in a position where lives depended entirely on her decisions. Everything she had trained for, everything she had proven, had led to this moment. The question was no longer whether a woman could survive in combat. It was whether she could lead in combat when leadership meant the difference between life and death. And that leadership would be tested immediately because the enemy fire was intensifying. And Maria could see insurgent fighters beginning to move toward their trapped position. The firefight erupted with devastating intensity that exceeded even Maria's worst fears. She counted at least 6 separate firing positions, each coordinated to create overlapping fields of fire that turned the intersection into a killing ground. The insurgents had planned this ambush perfectly, using the abandoned buildings to create a fortress that could withstand a prolonged engagement. Maria's immediate concern was getting to the wounded soldiers in the burning lead vehicle. Walsh was already moving toward them, but she was exposed to fire from multiple directions. Torres and Bradley were pinned down behind a concrete barrier, unable to provide effective covering fire. "Torres!" Maria shouted over the gunfire. "Can you get an angle on the building at 2 o'clock? "Negative," Torres replied. "Too much fire coming from that position." Maria studied the tactical situation. The enemy had positioned themselves to prevent any flanking maneuvers, but they had also committed to fixed positions. If she could identify their command structure and disrupt their coordination, she might be able to create an opportunity for her squad to escape. Moving in a low crouch, Maria made her way to where Bradley was taking cover. "What's your assessment?" she asked. Bradley looked shaken but determined. "At least 20 enemy fighters, maybe more. They've got us in a perfect crossfire. We need to call for air support." "Radio's down," Maria replied. "We're on our own." The reality of their situation was sobering. Without air support or reinforcements, they were outnumbered and outgunned. The enemy had chosen their ground carefully, and they had all the advantages of prepared positions and coordinated fire. But Maria had noticed something during her analysis of the ambush. The enemy positions were designed to prevent escape, but they were also vulnerable to a coordinated counterattack if executed properly. The buildings they were using for cover could become traps if the American forces could reverse the tactical situation. "I have an idea," Maria told Bradley. "But it's going to require precise timing and a lot of trust." "What do you need?" Maria pulled out her map and sketched quickly. "The enemy is using that 3-story building as their command post. See how all the other firing positions are oriented to support it. If we can take out their command structure, the whole ambush falls apart." Bradley studied her sketch. "That building is in the middle of the kill zone. Getting to it would be suicide. Not if we create a diversion. Look at the drainage system under the street. If I can get into that culvert, I can approach the building from below. But I'll need cover and fire from multiple positions to mask my movement." The plan was incredibly risky. Maria would have to crawl through a drainage pipe under active combat, emerge behind enemy lines, and assault a fortified position single-handedly. The chances of success were minimal, but the alternative was waiting for the enemy to systematically destroy their squad. "Rodriguez," Bradley said quietly, "this is insane. You're talking about a one-person assault on a fortified position." "I'm talking about using the element of surprise to disrupt their command structure. Once their coordination breaks down, we'll have a chance to fight our way out." Before Bradley could respond, Walsh's voice cut through the gunfire. "I need help. I've got 3 wounded soldiers here, and they need immediate evacuation." Maria looked toward the burning vehicle. Walsh was working frantically to treat the wounded, but she was completely exposed to enemy fire. The medic's position was becoming increasingly dangerous as the insurgents adjusted their aim. "Cover me," Maria told Bradley. "I'm going to help." "Walsh, Rodriguez, wait." But Maria was already moving. She sprinted across the open ground toward the burning vehicle, her body armor absorbing the impact of several rounds that came close to finding their mark. She reached Walsh's position just as the medic was dragging Specialist Johnson away from the flames. "How bad?" Maria asked, immediately taking a defensive position to provide cover. "Johnson's got shrapnel wounds and possible internal bleeding. Martinez is unconscious with a head injury. Thompson... Walsh paused, her voice catching. "Thompson didn't make it." Maria felt a surge of anger and grief, but she pushed the emotions aside. There would be time to mourn later if they survived. Right now her focus had to be on saving the soldiers who were still alive. "Can you move the wounded?" Maria asked. "Not far. Johnson needs immediate surgery, and Martinez shouldn't be moved until we can stabilize his head injury." The tactical situation was becoming impossible. They couldn't retreat with severely wounded soldiers, but they couldn't hold their position indefinitely against a superior force. Maria realized that her plan to assault the enemy command post wasn't just their best option, it was their only option. "Walsh, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to create a diversion that will draw fire away from your position. When I do, you need to get the wounded to that concrete barrier where Torres and Bradley are positioned. Can you do that?" Walsh looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "What kind of diversion are you talking about?" "The kind that either saves all of us or gets me killed. But right now, those are the only options we have." As Maria prepared to implement her plan, she noticed something that changed her assessment of the tactical situation. The enemy fire was becoming less coordinated. The precise, overlapping fields of fire that had initially trapped her squad were beginning to show gaps. The insurgents were running low on ammunition, or their command structure was already beginning to break down under the stress of the engagement. "Bradley," she called out. "Do you still have contact with the base?" "Negative. Radios completely dead." Maria made a decision that would define not just her military career, but her understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. She was going to attempt something that textbooks said was impossible: a single soldier assault on a fortified position, defended by superior numbers. But as she prepared to move toward the drainage culvert that would give her access to the enemy command post, Maria realized that everything in her training and experience had prepared her for this moment. The analytical skills that had helped her identify eyed patterns, the tactical thinking that had spotted the ambush before it was sprung, the physical conditioning that had carried her through months of combat operations, all of it was leading to this single moment where her actions would determine whether her squad lived or died. "Torres," she shouted. "In 60 seconds, I want you to concentrate all your fire on the building at 2 o'clock. Don't worry about accuracy, just make noise and keep their heads down." "Roger, what's the plan? I'm going to end this." Maria took a deep breath and began moving toward the drainage entrance. Behind her, she could hear Walsh working frantically to stabilize the wounded soldiers. Ahead of her, she could see the enemy positions that had turned her squad's routine patrol into a desperate fight for survival. What she was about to attempt would either be remembered as an act of extraordinary heroism or as the reckless decision that got her killed. But as she crawled toward the storm drain that would take her beneath the enemy stronghold, Maria knew that she was no longer fighting just for her own survival, or even for the lives of her squad members. She was fighting to prove that when the moment of ultimate testing arrived, a soldier's effectiveness had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with courage, training, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the mission and the team. The drainage tunnel lay ahead, dark and foreboding, leading directly into the heart of enemy territory where Maria would face the greatest challenge of her life. The drainage culvert was smaller and more treacherous than Maria had expected, forcing her to crawl on her belly through 2 feet of stagnant water and debris that had accumulated over years of urban warfare. The sound of gunfire above was muffled but constant, a reminder that her squad was still fighting for their lives while she attempted what many would consider a suicide mission. The concrete tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, lit only by occasional shafts of light filtering through storm drains. Maria's combat load made the crawl even more difficult. Her body armor scraped against the concrete ceiling, and her weapon kept catching on debris. But she pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that every second counted and that above her, Walsh was treating wounded soldiers who might not survive much longer without immediate evacuation. As she moved through the tunnel, Maria's mind raced through the tactical possibilities. The enemy command post was in a 3-story building that dominated the intersection. If she could reach it undetected, she might be able to eliminate the enemy leadership and disrupt their coordination. But the building would be defended, and once she emerged from the tunnel, she would be completely on her own against an unknown number of enemy fighters. The drainage system was more complex than she had anticipated. Multiple tunnels branched off in different directions, creating a maze beneath the city streets that had been built decades earlier by Iraqi engineers. Maria had to rely on her memory of the surface layout to navigate toward her target, using the sound of gunfire above to orient herself and ensure she was moving in the right direction. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Maria reached a position directly beneath the enemy command post. She could hear voices above Arabic commands being shouted between fighters. The language was a dialect she didn't recognize, but the tone was urgent and increasingly desperate. The enemy was also feeling the pressure of the engagement, which meant her squad's resistance was more effective than she had hoped. Maria found a storm drain opening that would put her inside the building's perimeter, but emerging would expose her to immediate detection and almost certain death. She needed a way to create confusion and chaos that would give her a few precious seconds to establish a fighting position before the enemy could react to her presence. Looking through her equipment, Maria found her solution: 2 fragmentation grenades that she had been saving for an emergency. If she could time their detonation correctly, the explosions would create enough confusion to mask her emergence from the tunnel system and allow her to gain the element of surprise that was essential to her plan's success. But first, she needed to coordinate with her squad to ensure they could take advantage of the chaos she was about to create. Maria pulled out her backup radio and tried to raise Bradley through the static and interference caused by the concrete buildings surrounding the intersection. "Bradley, this is Rodriguez. Do you copy?" "Rodriguez, where the hell are you?" "We thought you were dead. I'm beneath the enemy command post. In 30 seconds, I want you to concentrate all available fire on the building. Make them think you're preparing for a direct assault." "Rodriguez, this is crazy. You can't take on a fortified position by yourself. I don't have a choice. The wounded need immediate evacuation, and we can't do that until we break up this ambush. Trust me, Bradley." Maria could hear the hesitation in Bradley's voice. Everything in their training said that individual soldiers didn't assault fortified positions alone. But their training hadn't prepared them for a situation where conventional tactics had failed, and desperate measures were the only option. Sometimes Maria realized survival required abandoning the rulebook and trusting in skills, instincts, and sheer determination. "Roger, Rodriguez, 30 seconds." Maria positioned herself beneath the storm drain opening and prepared her grenades. She could hear the enemy fighters above moving equipment and calling out tactical adjustments. The sound of American weapons fire was decreasing, which meant her squad was running low on ammunition and time was running out. "Torres," she heard Bradley's voice over the radio. "Walsh, concentrate all fire on the 3-story building. Now." The intensity of gunfire from her squad's position increased dramatically. Maria could hear the enemy fighters above responding to what they perceived as a direct assault. Boots pounded on wooden floors as they repositioned to meet the threat from the front of the building. Exactly as Maria had hoped they would, Maria pulled the pins on both grenades and tossed them up through the storm drain. The explosions came seconds apart, filling the building with smoke and debris and creating the chaos she needed. In the confusion that followed, she hauled herself up through the opening and into the building, emerging like a phantom from beneath the enemy's feet. The first floor was a maze of makeshift barricades and fighting positions through the smoke. Maria could see enemy fighters moving toward the front of the building to respond to her squad's diversionary attack. She had perhaps 60 seconds before they realized the real threat was behind them, and she would need every one of those seconds to reach the command post on the upper floors, moving with practiced stealth that had been drilled into her through months of urban warfare training. Maria made her way toward the staircase that led to the upper floors. The building's layout was typical of Iraqi construction: thick walls that provided excellent cover, but also limited visibility between rooms. She used this to her advantage, moving from room to room without being detected by the enemy fighters, who were focused on the apparent assault from the front. On the second floor, Maria found what she was looking for: the enemy command post. Radio equipment, maps, and ammunition were scattered across several tables. But more importantly, she could hear the voice of the enemy commander coordinating the ambush from a position near the window, completely unaware that an American soldier was now inside his stronghold. This was the moment Maria had been preparing for throughout her entire military career. Everything she had learned, every skill she had developed, every doubt she had overcome had led to this single moment when her actions would determine whether her squad lived or died. The time for preparation and analysis was over. Now came the moment of action that would define everything. Maria crept closer to the enemy command post, her weapon ready and her mind focused with the clarity that comes only in moments of absolute necessity. Through a partially open door, she could see 3 enemy fighters, 2 operating radio equipment and 1 studying a map of the intersection. The commander was giving orders in rapid-fire Arabic, coordinating the positions of his fighters based on the diversionary attack her squad was conducting below. Maria's assault on the enemy command post was swift and decisive. She breached the door with a burst of automatic fire, immediately eliminating the radio operator and forcing the other fighters to take cover. The element of surprise was complete. The enemy had been focused on the fateful diversionary attack outside and hadn't expected a threat from within their own building. The enemy commander, a man in his 40s with the weathered face of a veteran fighter, reacted faster than his subordinates. He rolled behind an overturned table and returned fire with a burst from his AK-47. The round struck the doorframe inches from Maria's head, sending splinters of wood flying and confirming that this would be a fight to the death. American dog, he shouted in accented English. You think you can defeat us in our own territory? Maria didn't waste time with a response. She moved tactically through the room, using the furniture and equipment as cover while maintaining suppressive fire. Her training had taught her that close-quarters combat was about speed, accuracy, and maintaining the initiative. The moment she allowed the enemy to dictate the terms of engagement, she would lose the advantage that had gotten her this far. The second enemy fighter attempted to flank her position, but Maria had anticipated the move. She pivoted and engaged him with a controlled burst that sent him sprawling behind a pile of ammunition crates. The commander used this distraction to reposition himself near the window, where he could coordinate with his fighters outside. Positions 2 and 3, he called into his radio. American forces inside the building. Redirect fire to the 2nd floor. Maria realized that her presence had been detected and that enemy fighters outside were now targeting her position. The window exploded inward as bullets from multiple directions shattered the glass and sent debris flying across the room. She took cover behind a concrete pillar, but she knew her position was becoming untenable with each passing second. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Outside, she could hear her squad's gunfire becoming more sporadic, indicating they were running critically low on ammunition. The enemy fighters were redirecting their attention to the building she was in, which meant the pressure on her squad was temporarily reduced, but it also meant she was about to be overwhelmed by superior numbers. Maria made a decision that would define the rest of the engagement. Instead of trying to hold the command post, she would use it as a platform to disrupt the entire enemy operation. The radio equipment in the room was still functional, and she could use it to create confusion among the enemy fighters who were now converging on her position. Moving quickly while staying low to avoid the gunfire coming through the window, she reached the radio and began transmitting false commands in the few Arabic phrases she had learned during her deployment. "Withdraw to secondary positions," she called out, hoping her pronunciation was close enough to be understood by the enemy fighters. American reinforcements approaching from the east. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Through the broken window, she could see enemy fighters in the surrounding buildings beginning to move. The coordinated fire that had trapped her squad was becoming fragmented as individual fighters repositioned based on the false orders, exactly as Maria had hoped. But the enemy commander had realized what was happening. "Traitor!" he screamed, firing at Maria's position with renewed fury. "She is using our own communications against us." Maria returned fire, but her ammunition was running dangerously low. She had perhaps 30 rounds left in her magazine, and no opportunity to reload in the confined space of the command post, with enemy fire concentrated on her position. Every shot had to count, and she needed to end this engagement quickly. Commander made a tactical error, exposing himself as he tried to reach the radio to countermand Maria's false orders. Maria's training in marksmanship served her well. A controlled burst caught him center mass, and he collapsed next to the radio equipment, ending his coordination of the ambush. With the enemy commander eliminated, Maria could hear the confusion spreading through the enemy ranks. The coordinated ambush was falling apart as individual fighters received conflicting orders and lost contact with their leadership. But she also knew that her position was becoming increasingly dangerous as enemy fighters from throughout the building converged on the command post. Enemy fighters from the ground floor were advancing up the staircase, and she could hear them calling out tactical positions as they prepared to assault the command post. Maria had perhaps 2 minutes before they breached the room, and she was running out of options for escape or continued resistance. Looking around the room, she noticed something that gave her a final desperate idea. The enemy had stored significant quantities of ammunition and explosives in the command post, probably to resupply their fighters during the engagement. If she could detonate those supplies, the explosion would not only eliminate the immediate threat, but also create enough chaos to allow her squad to escape from the kill zone below. Maria found a phosphorus grenade among the enemy supplies, a weapon that would create an intense fire that would spread quickly through the ammunition and create a massive explosion. But using it would mean she had less than 60 seconds to escape the building before it became an inferno that would kill anyone still inside. The decision was made in an instant. Maria pulled the pin and tossed the grenade into the pile of ammunition crates, then grabbed the enemy radio for one final transmission that would save her squad's lives. "Bradley, this is Rodriguez. Building is about to explode. Move the wounded to the extraction point now." Maria transmitted into the enemy radio. Knowing this would be her final communication with her squad, Maria had less than 40 seconds to escape the building before the phosphorus grenade ignited the ammunition stockpile. She raced toward the staircase, taking the steps 3 at a time while enemy fighters climbed up from below. The building had become a vertical battlefield, with Maria caught between the approaching explosion above and the enemy fighters below who were unaware of the death trap their building had become. At the first floor landing, she encountered 2 insurgents who had been advancing to reinforce the command post. The corridor was narrow, giving neither side much room to maneuver. Maria's combat training took over. She engaged the first fighter with a burst of automatic fire while using the staircase railing as cover. The second fighter returned fire, his rounds striking the concrete wall behind her and sending chips of masonry flying. Maria's ammunition counter showed 8 rounds remaining. She had to make every shot count while finding a way to escape the building before the explosion that was now inevitable. The tactical situation was becoming desperate. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time with each passing second. The sound of igniting ammunition from the floor above was growing louder and more intense. Small explosions were beginning to cascade through the stockpile, creating a chain reaction that would soon engulf the entire building. Maria could feel the heat and see smoke beginning to fill the stairwell, confirming that her plan was working, but also that her time was almost up. "American!" shouted the surviving enemy fighter. "You have killed us all." Maria realized that the enemy fighter was right. The explosion would kill anyone still in the building, regardless of which side they were on. For a moment, she considered trying to warn him, but another burst of gunfire in her direction eliminated any thoughts of mercy. This was war, and sometimes survival required making impossible choices. She had 20 seconds. Maria made a decision that combined desperation with tactical thinking. Instead of trying to fight her way to the ground floor exit, she would use a second-floor window to escape. The drop was significant, but it was preferable to being caught in the ammunition explosion that was now consuming the upper floors. She fired her remaining rounds to suppress the enemy fighter, then sprinted back up the stairs to the second floor. The command post was now fully engulfed in smoke and small fires. The ammunition was beginning to detonate in earnest, creating a series of explosions that shook the building's foundation and confirmed that the chain reaction was unstoppable. Maria reached the window she had identified as her escape route. It faced the rear of the building, away from the main battle zone where her squad was positioned. The drop to the ground was approximately 15 feet, dangerous but survivable if she landed correctly and managed to clear the building before the main explosion. She had 10 seconds. Maria climbed through the window frame and prepared to jump. As she did, she could see her squad in the distance, moving the wounded soldiers toward the extraction point she had recommended. Bradley was carrying Johnson, while Walsh supported Martinez. Torres was providing covering fire from a position near the concrete barrier, exactly as they had planned. They were going to make it. Maria jumped just as the ammunition stockpile reached critical mass. The explosion that followed was massive, a fireball that engulfed the entire top floor of the building and sent debris flying in all directions. The concussion wave threw Maria forward as she fell, but it also masked her landing from any enemy observers who might have been watching for escaping American soldiers. She hit the ground hard, her body armor absorbing most of the impact but leaving her winded and disoriented. Her ears were ringing from the explosion, and she could taste blood in her mouth from where she had bitten her tongue during the landing. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was free of the building that had become a blazing inferno. Behind her, the explosion had achieved everything Maria had hoped for and more. The enemy command structure was completely destroyed. Their ammunition stockpile was gone, and the coordinated ambush had collapsed into chaos. Enemy fighters throughout the area were either dead, wounded, or retreating in confusion as their carefully planned operation fell apart. But Maria's mission wasn't complete. She still had to rejoin her squad and help with the evacuation of the wounded soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. Her radio was damaged but functional, and she could hear Bradley's voice calling for her through the static. Rodriguez, do you copy? What's your status?" "I'm alive," Maria replied, struggling to her feet and checking her equipment. "The command post is destroyed. Enemy resistance should be collapsing." "Roger. We're at the extraction point. With the wounded, can you make it to our position?" Maria surveyed the battlefield around her. The intersection that had been a kill zone 15 minutes earlier was now filled with smoke and debris from the explosion. Enemy fighters were visible in the distance, but they were retreating rather than maintaining their positions. The ambush had been broken, exactly as she had planned. "I'm on my way," she replied, beginning to move toward her squad's position. As Maria made her way through the debris-strewn streets toward the extraction point, she realized that something fundamental had changed. The voices on the radio weren't questioning her decisions or expressing doubt about her capabilities. Bradley, Torres, and Walsh were communicating with her as they would with any other squad leader, with respect, trust, and recognition of her tactical expertise. The firefight had lasted less than an hour, but it had transformed not just the immediate tactical situation, but the entire dynamic of her squad and her understanding of her own capabilities. She was no longer a woman trying to prove herself in a combat role. She was a combat leader who had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances possible. When Maria reached the extraction point, she found her squad preparing for the evacuation of the wounded soldiers who had survived because of her actions. When Maria reached the extraction point, she found her squad preparing for the evacuation of the wounded soldiers. Johnson was conscious but weak, his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes alert and focused. Martinez was stable but still unconscious from his head injury, his breathing steady thanks to Walsh's expert medical care. The tactical situation was secure, but they needed immediate medical evacuation to save the wounded soldiers' lives. "Rodriguez," Bradley said as she approached, his voice filled with something Maria had never heard from him before. "Complete." respect and admiration. I don't know how you did it, but you saved our lives, all of us. Maria looked at her squad soldiers who had doubted her, tested her, and ultimately trusted her with their lives. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but it was also exactly what she had been training for throughout her entire military career. She had proven that leadership wasn't about gender or physical strength. It was about making the right decisions under impossible pressure. "We all saved each other," she replied. "That's what squads do." The medical evacuation helicopters arrived 20 minutes after Maria's destruction of the enemy command post. Johnson and Martinez were both transported to the combat hospital at Baghdad International Airport, where military surgeons worked around the clock to save their lives. Johnson recovered fully after 3 weeks of intensive treatment, while Martinez faced a longer rehabilitation from his head injury, but ultimately returned to duty with no permanent effects. The after-action review of the ambush and Maria's response was conducted by Colonel Sarah Mitchell, one of the few female officers in the division command structure. Mitchell had followed Maria's career with interest, recognizing that her success or failure would influence policy decisions about women in combat roles for years to come. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Mitchell began, "your actions during the engagement saved the lives of your entire squad and eliminated a significant enemy threat. But I want to understand your decision-making process. Why did you choose to assault the command post alone rather than waiting for reinforcements?" Maria had spent days preparing for this question, knowing that her answer would be scrutinized by military leaders throughout the chain of command. "Ma'am, the tactical situation didn't allow for conventional solutions. Our wounded soldiers needed immediate evacuation, and we couldn't hold our position indefinitely. The enemy had chosen their ground well, and they had us trapped in a kill zone. But a single soldier assault on a fortified position violates established doctrine. You took an enormous risk." "Yes, ma'am, but I analyzed the risk against the alternatives. If we had waited for reinforcements, Johnson and Martinez would have died from their injuries. If we had attempted to fight our way out conventionally, we would have taken additional casualties. The enemy position was strong, but it was also vulnerable to an unconventional approach." Mitchell studied the tactical map that showed the engagement area, complete with the positions of enemy fighters and the route Maria had taken through the drainage system. "Your analysis of the enemy's preparation was accurate. Intelligence has confirmed that this ambush was planned for weeks, specifically designed to target American patrols in the eastern sector. Ma'am, I believe the enemy underestimated our ability to adapt to their tactics. They expected us to respond conventionally, which would have played into their strengths. By using unconventional tactics, we were able to turn their prepared position into a disadvantage." The formal recognition of Maria's actions came in the form of a Bronze Star Medal with Valor device, presented by General Patricia Morrison, the commanding general of the 3rd Infantry Division. The ceremony took place at Forward Operating Base Liberty, with Maria's squad and other members of her unit in attendance, along with representatives from military leadership who had come to witness this historic moment. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," General Morrison announced, "through your exceptional courage and tactical brilliance, you saved the lives of your fellow soldiers and eliminated a significant threat to coalition forces. Your actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service and demonstrate that leadership, courage, and tactical expertise have nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character." The medal was significant, but Maria knew that the real recognition came from her squad members and the respect she had earned through her actions rather than her words. Bradley, who had been the most resistant to accepting her as a full member of the team, approached her after the ceremony. "Rodriguez, I owe you more than an apology. I spent months thinking that having a woman in the squad would make us weaker. I was wrong. You didn't just prove that women can serve in combat. You proved that you're one of the best soldiers I've ever served with, period." Torres was more direct in his appreciation. "You saved our lives, Maria, all of us. We're not going to forget that, and we're going to make sure nobody else forgets it either." Walsh, the medic who had worked frantically to save the wounded during the engagement, offered a different perspective that spoke to the broader implications of Maria's actions. "What you did out there, it's going to change things. Not just for women in combat, but for how the military thinks about leadership and tactical decision-making." The impact of Maria's actions extended far beyond her immediate unit. The successful defense against the ambush became a case study taught at military academies and staff colleges throughout the country. The unconventional tactics she had employed were analyzed and incorporated into training programs for special operations forces, and her story became required reading for officers studying combat, leadership, but perhaps the most significant impact was on military culture itself. The narrative that women were unsuited for combat roles became increasingly difficult to maintain when confronted with documented evidence of a female soldier single-handedly defeating a superior enemy force and saving her entire squad through tactical brilliance and extraordinary courage. Maria's deployment ended 3 months after the ambush. She returned to the United States with a reputation as one of the most effective combat leaders in her division. But she also carried with her the knowledge that her success had come at a cost, the constant pressure of representing all women in combat, the need to prove herself over and over again, and the recognition that her failures would be attributed to her gender, while her successes would be treated as exceptions. As she prepared to leave Iraq, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small town in Texas to a battlefield where she had proven that courage, intelligence, and tactical skill were not determined by gender. The doubts that had followed her throughout her military career had been replaced by the confidence that came from testing herself under the most extreme circumstances possible. "They said I'd never survive combat," Maria told her father during a phone call home. "They were wrong about that. But more importantly, they were wrong about what survival means. It's not just about staying alive, it's about being willing to risk everything to protect the people who depend on you." Her father, the Vietnam veteran who had inspired her to join the military with his stories of courage and sacrifice, understood exactly what she meant. "Maria, you've proven something that needed to be proven. But more than that, you've opened doors for other women who want to serve their country in combat roles. That's a legacy worth building a career on." As Maria prepared to continue her military service, she knew that the ambush in Iraq had been just the beginning of her story. The real challenge would be continuing to serve with distinction while helping to change a military culture that was slowly but inevitably recognizing that the best soldiers were not defined by their gender, but by their character, training, and willingness to sacrifice for their comrades. The war in Iraq would end, but the impact of Maria's actions would continue to influence military policy and culture for decades to come. She had proven that when the moment of ultimate testing arrived, the only thing that mattered was a soldier's ability to think clearly, act decisively, and put the mission and the team above personal safety. They said she'd never survive combat. Instead, she had redefined what combat leadership looked like and paved the way for future generations of women who would serve with distinction in roles that had once been closed to them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.